Nandi Hill, welcome to Reel Lyfe TV.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we believe that everyone has a story, so we wanted to invite you to share your raw and uncut, authentic story.
Okay.
So here we go.
All right. Let's go.
When and where you were born?
I was born in 1965 in Los Angeles, California. Hollywood, of course.
Okay. Did you grow up in a single parent household, or did you have both parents in your household together?
I grew up with both of my parents. My father and mother was there, and at least until I was 9 years old, my dad stayed with us. So it was a blended family and stuff at the time and stuff. Well, I wouldn't say a blended family. They were all my mother's children and stuff, but my dad had 5 children with my mom.
Okay. What about siblings? Did you have any siblings?
Yes, a host of siblings and stuff. I had 7 brothers and 2 sisters. It was 10 of us. I am number 7 in my family line of children. I have 3 younger brothers, younger than me, 2 older sisters, and 4 older brothers.
What was that relationship like?
Yeah, we had a great time. So we didn't play with anybody outside and stuff because, we were enough for in the household. But my oldest brother, Roy, was actually the matriarch. I mean, he was the patriarch in our family and stuff. So he was the disciplinarian in the family. And then my oldest sister, who was the oldest of all of us, she was like more like the matriarch. So she taught us a lot, and she kind of kept, watch over us. And my brother Roy kind of kept watch over us, as well as, I kept watch over the 3 younger ones.
Oh, okay. As far as the neighborhood and stuff, what was that like growing up? Like, as you said, it was 10 of y'all and stuff like that. So as far as growing up in the neighborhood and stuff like that, in the home, describe the home and how was it?
In the neighborhoods, we moved in a lot of neighborhoods. My mom was like a gypsy. So, we just basically moved everywhere and stuff. So we lived in like California most of the time. We lived in like Los Angeles. We moved to Fresno, California. We moved to Arizona. We lived in Las Vegas. So it was more like a gumble. We didn't have like a permanent residence kind of place in any one place. But Los Angeles, I would say that was like our permanent place because we lived here the longest. But yeah, just in the household and stuff. I mean, it was more of, just all of us. We didn't have a lot of outside friends because the way we were raised and stuff, we didn't wasn't allowed to have too many people inside our house. So that was that.
Oh, okay. Cool. As far as when y'all was growing up in the household, did y'all have any religion or any rituals and stuff like that?
I wouldn't say we had rituals and stuff, but we did have. I grew up in the Nation of Islam, and so during that time, when my dad and mom actually met, my father became a Muslim in 1958 or so. And so when he met my mom was already a Christian. She was a Christian at the time. And he met my mom, and my mom was converted to Islam. So I was raised like in the nation. I didn't know anything outside of that because when you're born, you're called born in the Nation of Islam. So we were born in the Nation of Islam. It was under Elijah Muhammad at the time. And now it's like I'm more of like Louis Farrakhan, and it was his son Warthi Muhammad. But we were raised Muslim, so I was raised Muslim all the way up until I was like 19 years old. I practiced Islam, so it was different. We didn't celebrate any holidays and stuff. I would say that it's more like and a lot of folks get upset when I say this, but it was more like Jehovah's Witness. That's how we were. It was more similar to the Jehovah's Witness in Christianity and stuff. So that's how it was. And folks don't, a lot of people get upset. It's like, no, we're nothing like them, but they are a lot like them. They had the same type of predictions in the 1975s and the 1970s. They had the same predictions. They do a lot of the same things and stuff. So when I studied with Jehovah's Witness, that's how I realized that they did a lot of the similarities of what they believe was similar to the Nation of Islam.
Okay. Wow. So during that time, did you have any? Was the Nation of Islam, did they influence you? Like, as far as growing up, what was the most influential thing during that time? Like, far as you say you was born into it, like who influenced you the most? Was it your family or was in that during that early development?
I think that in that early development, I think the most influence, I would say Islam influenced me a lot.
Hmm.
What it did teach us, and I would say, I ain't gonna say us, but me, what it did teach me is that, to be proud as, as a black person, because during that time in the 70s and stuff, it was really, they were just, in the 60s, they were, already hosing folks down and stuff, people of color and stuff. So they was hosing a lot of black people down. Black people were considered, less of a human being at the time. And it was just, it was a bad time. It was a bad time in the 60s. So when I was born in the 60s, and as I was being, raised in the Nation of Islam, we had the double standard because we were Muslims. It was like if you were in the Nation of Islam, you were talked about. It wasn't something that was a nice thing. It wasn't something that, you were basically applauded for. You were talked about. But it did teach me a lot of leadership. It taught me a lot of leaderships. And I think that most of the individuals in my family were not followers. So we don't follow individuals. We lead. We do not follow. And that was one of the things that the Nation of Islam taught us is to lead. You don't follow behind individuals. You always lead. And I think nowadays with, just with kids growing up nowadays, a lot of kids are followers. They get involved in like gangs and different kind of things because they become followers and stuff. But for me, I was always a leader. I was never a follower. I walked alone. I took accountability and took responsibility for the things and actions that, that I did. And it wasn't one of those things where we were blaming other people, because that's just how our dad, taught us. And then my mom taught us, they're entrepreneurs. So they were always entrepreneurs, always trying to make ends meet and stuff. So, but it was different, it was different and stuff. And then also we grew up like in, like a farmland kind of areas and stuff. We, kind of like, didn't eat outside, go to the grocery store kind of thing like that. We went to the grocery stores, but my mom baked, she baked, we killed chickens and, we ate food off the farm. We went and picked, we had gardens and stuff. I mean, and then we didn't have no little garden and stuff. We had a farm garden, where you planted everything. We planted everything. We grew everything. And that's what the Nation of Islam would, taught us and stuff. You grow everything. You recycle the money where you are. And there was a book by Elijah Muhammad was called How to Eat to Live. And that book was very instrumental in people that were in the Nation of Islam, basically, cultivating and building and buying farm-like areas and stuff. So I know when we moved to Arizona, my dad and brother, I never forget his name, Brother T. Floyd. Mm-hmm. Brother T. Floyd and my dad, they actually purchased like, a farm together and stuff. So my dad had an investment in there. And we used to go there and they had goats and cows and sheep and horses and all that other stuff on, at the farm. And I think that I learned how to milk a cow, when I was there. And so it was just, it was interesting. It was interesting and stuff, but, it taught us leadership. It taught us to lead and not to follow.
Okay. So during those times too, it says, you were going to school, I know you mentioned off air, you were talking about since you grew up Muslim, you went to Muslim schools, right?
Yes.
So how was that like, going to Muslim school?
Well, the Muslim school that we went to at the time when we were younger, the Muslim school, there was, I don't know if people know this and stuff, when you're into Islam and stuff, there's a separation between genders. Mm-hmm. So the women sit on one side and the men sit on the other side. You don't sit together. Mm-hmm. They sit separately. And in the Muslim school, we went to school I think we went to school in the afternoon or either in the morning. I can't remember and stuff, but we went to school either in the afternoon and the morning. The girls and then the boys went in the afternoon or the morning. But we didn't go to school together. We didn't go to school together until we moved to Los Angeles, and we went to Sister Clara Muhammad, which was on Martin Luther King Boulevard, which is now Santa Monica Boulevard, right? So it used to be Santa Monica Boulevard. It is now Martin Luther King Boulevard down Century. That's where we went. So I went there until all the way up until the 7th grade. We learned how to speak Arabic. You learned how to read. You learned math, advanced math. And, it was different because when I went to public school, when we finally ended up going to public school,
Mm-hmm.
I was so much more advanced than the people that was at the public school.
Mm.
And, in the seventh grade or eighth grade, it was like the folks, it was like they were learning things that I learned like in the third grade.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was really, it was, they were far behind, the public schools. And I don't know if it was because it was public schools in the predominantly black neighborhood that I went to, because we went to Markham. But when I started going to like other schools where it's more mixed schools and stuff, like Jordan High School, in Long Beach, and in Bonanza in Las Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
it was like kind of evident that a lot of the education systems and stuff was kind of like behind what the Nation of Islam was actually teaching. I mean, we learned prayer and all that other stuff too and stuff. We learned a lot of other stuff. It's like any religious school that you go to and stuff, that you learn how to prayer and whatever, and but they taught us about economy and today's society and stuff. So in the seventh grade, we were reading the newspaper.
Okay. So did you have a favorite subject during that time in school?
A favorite subject? I wouldn't say I had a favorite subject. I said I had a hard subject. It was math, but I used to stay in the class, to get that math in and stuff. And now, math is one of the favorite things that I like to do is math and stuff. But I didn't really have a favorite subject and stuff. I think that if I had to pick a subject, I think speaking Arabic would have been one of the ones. Just languages.
That's pretty cool. So so you said you went to Muslim school all the way to the seventh grade,
Yes.
right? So you say you feel you was pretty advanced. You feel like you were advanced in the public school. So when y'all went to public school, how was that experience? So, and how old was you during this time when you went to the public school?
Well, when I went to public school, so when I was in the sixth grade, I was skipped to the seventh grade, right?
Oh, okay.
So we took an assessment test, and I took this assessment test, and they moved me to the seventh grade when we were in public school. So they moved me to the seventh grade, and of course I was in the seventh grade with my sister. My sister was in the seventh grade, and so now I'm in the seventh grade with her, and it was a little awkward, because my sister Ty is like a year and a half older than I am, and so I was in the seventh grade with kids that were at least a year and a half older, or a year older, or 2 years older than I was. And so it was an odd, experience and stuff, because here I am, I'm like 10 years old, and when I went to, I think I was like 11 or 12 when we went to the eighth grade. And when I was in the eighth grade, I think I was 12 years old, and everyone else was like either 13 going on 14, 13. Yeah. And so it was really odd. I was 11 or 12, and it was odd, because everyone else, was starting, the minstrel, and they was interested in boys, and I wasn't interested in any of that because I was still a kid, I was still like a kid. And so it was different, but the public school was, I mean, the first, we went there and we went to Markham, and the first couple of weeks, at Markham and stuff, first couple of weeks we was at Markham and stuff, my sister Ty, my brother, he taught us, we knew how to fight. That's one thing we did know how to do. That was one of the things that you learned in the Nation of Islam is protection, self-defense. So we practiced like crazy since I was at least 7 years old. My brother taught us martial arts. So we practiced like crazy. So we were taught in weaponry. You were taught in fighting, boxing, martial arts, everything. You were taught everything. A fight was a fight, and you were taught in all of that. And when I say weaponry, we talked about, knives, guns, and all the works, sticks, nunchucks, all of that. That's what my brother taught us and stuff, And so when we went to Markham, so it was like no fear factor, when you going to school and stuff. So even though there was a lot of gangs around at the time, because we went to school to Markham Junior High School, which was in Watts. And that was like kind of like, our first time actually going from, a private school to a public school. And we went to Markham. And I think the third week or so, a incident occurred on like on the lunch area, right? So I was out there. We were out there on the lunch area, and my sister, she was throwing the milk at her friend. She threw a carton of milk at her friend and stuff, and then it hit another girl, right? And so this girl apparently was a gang member, you know. Figure that, 7th grade and stuff. People think that, you know, Columbine just happened and stuff. No, these things were happening already in our community. But this girl, my sister threw a milk at, you know, at this girl. And so the girl was like, oh, you know, I'm going to fight you. And my sister said she apologized to her, but the girl wouldn't accept the apology. You know, she got up because, you know, she was showing out in front of her friends and decided she'll meet with my sister, you know, after school and stuff. So they was like, you know, we walking across the track to go home, and we walk in, you know, and it's a whole crowd of kids because they already got wind that there was going to be a fight. You know, we've never, you know, that was something that we never experienced really before and stuff. You had a fight individually and stuff, and you fought. But it was like a crowd of kids and stuff, you know, and I was like, oh my God, you know, we walk in, and I'm walking, and so my sister, the girl, you know, pretty much kind of squared up with her and stuff. And my sister, you know, because my sister Ty was very, very feminine, and she was, you know, really dressy and ooh, ha, 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 like that, you know, she was like that. They thought that she was just a pushover, but Tonetta was a beast. And so they didn't know that, you know, they thought that she couldn't fight because she was very pretty. You know, she was the typical light skinned, long hair, you know, black chick that, you know, petite and well dressed all the time. You know, me, I was a tomboy. So I just had, you know, you lucky my hair was combed, you know, you know, and I was young, you know, So that stuff wasn't, you know, important to me, you know, and so, you know, I just put on whatever, you know, in the morning time and stuff, put on a pair of pants, and my shirt didn't match. And Tanya used to get really upset behind that and stuff. I'm like, you're not even matching, you know? And I was like, because that wasn't important to me. I was 11 years old, 12 years old. That stuff wasn't important. But we squared up over there, and Tonetta, you know, I was like, okay, you know, it's a one-on-one fight, you know? So she got into this fight. The girl didn't stand a chance. She hit her, knocked the girl down and stuff. She just jumped on her, wheeled on her. She hit the girl first time and stuff. Ducked. The girl swung. She ducked. Came in with a combination and knocked the girl down and started wheeling on the gal. Next thing I know, they saw the girl on the ground. It's like at least 6 other girls tried to jump in. So my brother always taught us and stuff that when you're fighting and you're outnumbered, to back up against the wall. So Tonetta went. She saw the wall, she moved towards the wall and backed up against the wall, and she started throwing them. You know, she was throwing those punches. And I was like, I turned around, you know, I seen all these girls, you know, jumping my sister. So I started grabbing hairs, knocking heads together. I was bumping. I mean, I grabbed the girls' heads, and I was like, bam, they had afros and stuff. Hit the girls' heads together, and we was fighting, and I was grabbing them, snatching them off, socking them, and you know, this is junior high school, you know, and after somebody came and broke it up, right? Someone came and broke it up. It was a gentleman. He came and broke it up and stuff, and he broke up the fight. You know, we were like in the midst of the fight. He broke up the fight, and we're walking, and one of the girls says, Tonetta comes out unscathed. You know, she doesn't have no marks on her or anything, but those girls had marks all on them because she was doing whatever. And she had clawed one of the girls in the face, deep scratch in her face and stuff. And she clawed the girl in the face. The girl said, "You scratch." I mean, a deep scratch. That lady still has the scar to this day. Oh, wow. And she said, "You scratch me." And Tonetta turned around and said, "I'll scratch you again." Right? And the girl, she was just, you know, kind of, you know, just, you know, flabbergasted at that, and they were just following behind us. And then someone went and ran and got my brother, right? And got my brother Roy. Apparently, my brother Roy was a somebody in the community and stuff, because soon as those kids saw him, they was like, "It's Green." They took off running. They all took off running and stuff. And he was like, he prepared us to fight them the next day. He was like, we was going to fight them the next day. He said, we're going to fight, you guys going to fight them the next day. And he told us that we better win. That's what he told us. We were more scared of him than we were of them.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
so that was in junior high school, right?
Yes.
So now, what coming on to high school? What grade? What? Because I know they said back then the ninth grade was still junior high school, right?
Right. Right.
So as you got to high school, what was that experience like?
Okay. When I got to high school and stuff, it was like a little different because after the ninth grade, when I was 13 years old, one of my brothers suffered a nervous breakdown. One of my older brother, not a nervous breakdown, but he was spiked with some drugs and stuff, and so he suffered a mental break, and the mental break caused me to kind of like reevaluate, just what I wanted to do with life. So I kind of like dove into the books, because I determined, at the time when my brother was suffering from that and stuff, we couldn't help him, and in the Black community, it was always a taboo when people had mental illness. And so I felt like we couldn't help him. And no matter what it was, we couldn't help him. So when I was 13, I decided I wanted to be a psychologist because I wanted to help my brother. I wanted to help people that suffer mental breaks because, our community and the Black community and stuff, mental illness was a taboo. People just basically kind of like looked past it. My brother probably could have been, saved and brought back to himself had we gotten him help a lot longer and stuff, but because it was like, oh, he's just acting weird, or he's just being, he's acting like that, and telling him to stop, being that way, it was one of those things that, it lasted too long without treatment. And so it became a permanent thing because it lasts too long. It was like a year or two before he was actually, a year at the most, that he actually was able to get some help. That we actually had him committed because he was just getting more and more bizarre every day, and I can see that. And so when I got to high school, I kind of like dove into high school. With first high school that we went to, we moved out of Watts and stuff because of my brother's mental break and stuff. He tried to burn our house down while we were in it. And so we were evicted from the apartment that we lived in, the house that we lived in, and we moved to Long Beach. And we moved to Long Beach. I went to Long Beach, Jordan for the first semester. And, that was a different experience and stuff because, going to Markham and going to, the Muslim school and stuff was predominantly Black. And so going to Jordan, it was a mixture of everybody. It was a gumbo there,
Right.
And it was a mixture of everybody, which was most of the communities that we kind of grew up in, but not schools, And so, going to that experience and stuff, I always had one friend. I was not a crowd type of person and stuff. We were taught to be leaders. So I was never a crowd person. I only had one friend. My friend that was at Jordan was Valerie. She passed away and stuff. My friend was Valerie at Long Beach, Jordan. And that's all I hung out with, is just my friend Valerie. And then we moved, and after the first semester, my mom got a job at Caesar Palace in Las Vegas. So we moved to Las Vegas, and we went to Bonanza. My friend there was Diane. I only had one friend. I was not a crowd person and stuff. And so I only had one friend. Now, there was a lot of people I knew. I just didn't, I didn't like crowds. I didn't like crowds. I don't know if I didn't like crowds because, you have your siblings, all the time and stuff. And those are your closest trusted people in your lives and stuff. So anybody outside was just only one person. I only allowed one person in, and that was it, because my best friends was my sister, and my brothers and sisters. Those were my best friends. And I only let one person in at a time. And so we moved from Vegas in 1980, and my grandmother passed away in 1980. So my grandmother passed in 1980, and during that time, my mom ended up suffering a nervous break because of my grandmother's death. And we were sent over to Arizona to for the summer, like we had been doing for the previous summers to Arizona. My oldest sister lived in Arizona because she got married when she was like 16. And she lived in Arizona. And so we moved over to Arizona to, visit her for the summer. And so when we came back, my aunt, because my mom was in the hospital at the time, my aunt got us an emergency place over in the Jordan Projects. And that's how we ended up in the Jordan Projects. That was in 1981. That was my 11th and my 12th grade year.
Mm-hmm.
So we end up going, living in the Jordantown projects, and it was different. That was a predominantly black school as well, but it was different. It was the difference is that walking through the projects, you would encounter a lot of gangs. A lot of gangs as you going through the projects. I said, I guess a lot of them, the guys that graduate and the 20, 23-year-olds and stuff, they didn't understand the word pedophile, at the time and stuff, because they didn't see themselves as pedophiles. They didn't see themselves as individuals prying on these high schoolers and stuff. It was just a normal thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But school was great. I loved school. I excelled at school. That was like my quiet place. I went to school every day. I did not miss a class, because I didn't ditch school, because I feel like at the time I had established a purpose at 13 years old to be a psychologist and to try to help, my brother and help those who suffered from mental illness. And so I pressed in. So I was a straight A student. I was a straight A student. Maybe I would occasionally get a B, but I was a straight A student because I needed to be able to get into college, and that was my whole focus. And it didn't matter, about the social status or trying to fit in with individuals and nothing like that. That didn't matter to me. And the only thing that mattered to me is I need to get into a position to be able to help my brother.
Okay, that's very powerful.
Yeah.
So you said, you became a straight A student, the social status didn't matter. So did you end up going to college?
Absolutely.
Okay, tell me what college you went to.
I applied for 11 colleges.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I had a 1480 on the SAT. I applied for 11 colleges. I got accepted in all 11 colleges. I applied for UCLA, Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Dominguez. I got into Santa Barbara, San Jose. I got into Arizona State. I got into all the Cal States. I got into all those colleges. But when I went and visited them. They were just so huge. It was so huge, and I was used to having small settings. And again, I told you I was like the only person to have only one friend. Just have one friend and stuff. My friend Yolanda Martin is still my friend today. And from the 11th grade, she's still my friend today. Where she's actually my children's godparent. And so that is my one friend that I had during that time in 11th and the 12th grade. But I was like, I went to, you visit the colleges and stuff. So I went and visited the college. We were, my dad and them, they were so proud of me and stuff. So, because I was the first in our generation to go to college.
Really?
I was the first to go to college, not to go to college, but actually to complete, to get a bachelor's degree. Wow. I was the first. And my mom she had 10 kids, and I was number 7, and I was the first to complete a bachelor's degree. And so I was, really, pressed in and stuff, and I went to Cal State Bakersfield, and people were like, why did you go to Cal State Bakersfield? I said, because I went there. It was so small at the time. Right now, Bakersfield is built up. Cal State University Bakersfield is built up. But when I went there, the college sat in the middle of a field, and all you see is a bunch of field all the way around it. You smelled sheep because they used to bring the sheep in to eat the vegetation over there. And it was in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, this is it. And my dad and it was like, are you sure? And I was like, this is it. Because we went to San Jose, and it was all big, and went to UCLA, and then Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara was huge and stuff. It was like a bicycle. You had to take a bicycle class, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I'll be able to do that, And I was only 17. So I was 17 when I graduated. I didn't turn 18 until the following year. So when I went to college, most people turned 18 during that year. I didn't turn 18 until February. So I was only 17 years old. And so, going off on my own, to a college. So I chose Cal State Bakersfield. It was small. It was personal. I liked the presentation that they kind of gave of the college and stuff. And then it was familiar to me because of the farmland all around and the sheeps and the, stuff, the familiarity. And I felt like I can be successful there.
Okay. So how was that experience there? Like,
oh man, it was great. I have a lot of friends. I had a lot of friends. I was more of my friend Yolanda Stowe graduated with me. my friend Deborah Holmes, and that's where I received my salvation and stuff when I was in Cal State Bakersfield at age 19. But I was, I had a lot of friends stuff. Most of my friends was all the basketball players and stuff. I had all the basketball players and stuff because I just fit in with them because I had 7 brothers. So I wasn't very prissy or anything like that. And so most of the basketball players, they just hung out with me because I was just cool. I was cool and I was funny. I joked with them, and I didn't have those, I guess I didn't fit the traditional roles of some of the, other girls and stuff who were like, kind of prissy. And, I was just like me, unapologetically me. And so it was interesting. It was great. I loved it.
So quick question. So you said you received your salvation there too. So you were still Muslim when you went
Yes.
to college, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what made you go to the other side? Like, well, go become a Christian, I would say. What made you become a Christian?
Most people are raised, raised Christians. We didn't go to church. My mom thought that when we were going with my auntie and she was going to church, she thought we were going to church, but we weren't going to church. We was next door working in her store. So we were in the church. We never did go to the church and stuff because we were Muslim. So we knew that was something that, our parents, basically didn't allow. So we never did really go into churches like that. We didn't go into the church. We just kind of like, been there. But for that story and stuff, it's like my grandmother, I believe that my grandmother, who was a Christian and stuff, and she went to a holiness church and stuff, and she laid hands on me, a long time ago before she passed in 1980 and stuff. She had laid hands on me because I had a stomach ache, and my grandmother laid hands on me. My grandmother was a on your knees praying, speaking in tongues type of individual, and we knew that, and we didn't understand any of that really and stuff. We just knew that she would be in there, talking. I thought because, they from the South and stuff, because, they be talking French and all this other stuff. I thought that she was talking French and nothing. We didn't know nothing about speaking in tongues. We didn't know what she was talking about. We thought she was just speaking in another language, but she was in there always praying. My grandmother was always praying, we was always seeing her on her knees praying. She was always going to church every time we would come over there. When we lived with her during the summertime, she was always going to church. She didn't make us go to church because she respected my parents and stuff, and that we were Muslim. So she didn't make us go or anything like that. She just, she respected them. But when I was 19 years old, a friend of mine, when I became a freshman, and when I was 17, I was a freshman. I was reading my Quran, I was doing my salats, praying 5 times a day, and doing all the stuff. I still to this day don't eat pork or any of that, but I was basically, a Muslim, and that's how I carried myself. I was carrying myself as a Muslim. I didn't wear the hijab and cover up or anything like that, but my beliefs was Islam. And so that's what I knew. So I started studying the Quran, right? So I started reading the Quran. And then a friend of mine, she was a holiness too, and she was in that room with me, right? And I said, it's so ironic when I think about it. Her name was Deborah Holmes, and Deborah was in that room with me, and Deborah, she was always talking to me about, the scriptures and stuff. And in the Nation of Islam, the white man is the devil, that's who was the devil, the white man. So when she was telling me about that, I always had this ideology about Jesus, that he was a white man, blonde hair, blue eyes type of individual. And so I definitely was not believing in any of that, And so she would always talk about, I'm gonna pray for you and different things and stuff. And I was like, I was so irritated with her as my roommate. And the next year she was my roommate, right? And she probably chose not to be my roommate for whatever reason and stuff, because I was really radical. I was real radical about, Islam and, the white man's the devil kind of stuff. And you don't know what you're talking about and whatever. I was really bold, really radical and stuff. And I was 17. But I was very bold and upfront. And she kept, all the way up until my junior years. I was 19 in my junior year. And I came back from summer, and every year from like 2 years, she was just hounding me. Every time she see me, she told me, you should just come to church with me. You just come to church, and I feel like she was just harassing me, And I was like, yeah, she just wouldn't go to work and go away and stuff. So I remember going to her church, right? And I remember I said, okay, when I came back the next year, I saw her. She was like, oh, I'm like, oh my God, and so I ended up telling her, hey, okay. I said, my friend, I told her, I said, I'm just going to go to church with her just to get her from asking me. So my night when we came back after summer break and stuff and my junior year, I went ahead and I said, I'm going to go to church with her. So we planned to go to church. We had a dance that night. So the college had a dance that night. I went to the dance and we got back. I got back in the room like at 2 a.m. I get back in the room at 2 a.m. And all of a sudden, I get there at 2 a.m. I got to get up and the church starts at 9 o'clock. I was like, why she want to leave that early? So that means I have to sleep a little bit and get up. I'm showered and all that other stuff. So I didn't really know what to wear there, so I just put on the dress, because I was like, I figured, my grandmother always had a dress on and she always had dresses, because holiness, they don't wear pants. And so I put the dress, I went and got a dress. I only had one dress in that closet, okay, because I was a tomboy. I didn't have no dresses, and so I had one dress in that closet. And I think I put that dress on and I went with her, to church. So my friend Yolanda, it was my friend Yolanda, Jennifer, it was Deborah, and I think it was like a fourth person there. I can't remember who that person was and stuff. But we all went to church. We all went to church, and Yolanda then was going to church every Sunday with her already. So we go inside. We get into church, and they give you like the little program and stuff. I get the program, and then they escort you. The ushers open their arm to escort you down. And so my friend Deborah and them, she started look like she went into a march. She went into a march, and they were trolling behind her and stuff. And I was like, I stopped right at that back pew, and I was like, I'm not going up there. She was going all the way up front. I was like, I'm not gonna go up there. Yeah. So I sit in the back. I just came in and sit in the back pew. And so she was like, yeah, she was like, she just looked around, turned around, looked at me, and they was like, and I was like, I'm not going up there. I'm sitting back here, and I had a whole, attitude because I was there. One, I was tired, Second, I had an attitude because I was just there because I wanted her to stop asking me, and so I sat back there, and then they were talking, and, I didn't really know how church services kind of, went and whatever. And so people would stand up. So I just stood up because folks were standing up, and then they was doing praise and worship. And I mean, they was actually, they had a choir singing and stuff. So the choir was singing. And I was like, oh, they were singing and I'm just listening, to them and stuff because, I'm already in my mind rejecting everything they're singing about, right? They singing about Jesus and everybody. I'm like, hey, yeah, whatever, and that's how I was feeling. And they were basically, singing and, and we sat down, and when we sat down, they did the prayer, they did offering and, and of course the basket came by, I just passed it on because, you're not going to be getting anything that I had and stuff. And although I only had like a couple of dollars in my pocket, they weren't going to get that, And so when the pastor starts preaching, I was so tired. I fell asleep. I was asleep. I was so tired. I was back there to sleep, and I was unapologetically sleep, and I'm sure they probably was looking back there like, looking like Lottie back there asleep. I'm back there. I'm like back there. I'm tilted. I'm dead. Sleep. So all of a sudden I hear them clapping, right?
Yeah.
So we got there and church starts at 10. It was like almost 1 o'clock. Oh, wow. I was mad, I'm like, I was like, why are they in here so long? Right. And so, I'm mad and stuff. Now I'm real irritated because I looked at my watch. I had a watch on. I looked at my watch. It was almost 1 o'clock. And I was like, now I'm real mad, So I'm like, I got up and I was like, okay, we finna get out of here. I get up and I stand up. They, everybody starts standing up. I stand up again. And then they give the altar call. So they're giving the altar call. While they're giving the altar call, and they said, just everybody bow their head and close their eyes, and I bow my head, I'm closing my eyes, but I'm asleep. I'm not really, closing my eyes, praying along with them. I'm asleep. So I bow my head, close my eyes, and everybody, then I hear the clapping again. I'm like, when I opened my eyes, I was up front.
Really?
And I was like, what in the matter? I don't recall walking up there. I don't, to this day. And this is God honest truth. I do not recall. I don't remember walking up there. I don't know if I walked up there or what, but I was up front and I was standing up front And it was like this church had to be at least 100 something people in there. They had to have 100, maybe 200 people in this congregation. And I was up front, and they were clapping and stuff. And I was like, oh my God. I said, I hope they don't try to ask me to accept no Jesus up here, because I don't believe in any of that. And so they was like, see, this is how God is. God knows, he knows who you are, right? So he was like, oh, they said the prayer partner, follow the prayer partner in the back, and the prayer partner will lead you in the back. And they clapped and stuff. So they didn't make me, try to accept Jesus up there or nothing, right? So I went in the back. And so I go in the back with the lady and stuff. And so she sit me down. She asked me, what do I need from God? And she told me gave me her testimony and asked me about, and I was like, how do you know this Jesus is the truth? I said, that's a white man. That's a white man. And it's a white man religion. The King James wrote this Bible and stuff, all the stuff that people say now, that's what I believe. I said, King James wrote this Bible. That's a white man's Bible. And you got that and stuff. And they use that and stuff. You believe in a white man and this. And I don't believe in none of that. And I'm Muslim. And she said, well, we have Muslims here. And I was like, I said, well, I don't know how they got here, but I'm a Muslim and I'm not going to believe this. This is what we don't believe. So I was trying to convert her. I was telling her stuff about Islam, trying to convert her. I'm trying to convert her to Islam. And so she was like, well, I see that, I feel that God has called you up here and you came up front for a reason. She said, she said, you know what? I'm going to pray for you. So I said, okay, fine. So she grabs my hands and stuff. We stand up and she grabbed my hand. And so the lady is praying. The whole time she's praying, I'm just looking around the room, because I'm not in agreement with her, and I'm just looking around the room, looking out around the room while she's praying. She's sitting there praying and stuff. She prayed a nice little prayer and everything. And then she asked me, she said, do you want to pray? And she said, would you like to pray? And I said, sure. I said, yeah. And so she said, okay, go ahead. And so I let her hands go and I went this way. I said, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, alhamdulillah, bil alamin. I went into Arabic praying. And then she stopped me and she said, oh, I don't understand Arabic. Can you pray in English? And I said, oh, okay. And I put my hands this way. I said, in the name of Allah, the beneficent, the merciful, master of this day of judgment. And I went into reciting the prayer. Then she touched my hands again. She stopped me again. She says, well, and I'm like, at that time now, I'm like highly irritated now, right? Because I didn't stop you from praying. You praying in Jesus' name or whoever, I didn't stop you. So she grabbed my hand and she says, can you just pray in your own way, because, it just ask God what you want and stuff. And I'm like, ask God what I want. Yeah, just ask God what you want. She said, ask God. I believe that the Spirit of the Lord has called you here. And I believe that he wants to do something for you. And I'm like, okay, lady, I said, now I'm mad and stuff. So she was like, so I'm like, God, she said, well, just throw your hands up in a sign of surrender. She said, this is just the surrender. It's almost like this, but it's just showing your hands up in a sign of surrender. Here I am. I'm 19 years old. This is an adult, so I'm like, we've been programmed to, just kind of like, with every adult, not to be too disrespectful and stuff. But I was sighing and making a lot of noise and stuff. So she asked me, and then I raised my hand up like this, and I was like, so now I'm highly irritated. I think my lip was pursed like this. And she said, well, just ask God in your own word. And I said, God, that's how, I was like, God, if this Jesus is your son, then you going to have to prove. I was going to tell him he had to prove it to me. The word proof came out of my mouth and I hit the floor. I went face down on the floor in a prostrated position. And I went face down on the floor. And I was on the floor and I was trying to get up. And all of a sudden I kept hearing somebody speak. And I heard somebody speak and they were speaking and they were talking and it was like Roko Sindarakashe Ketso, and they were speaking and I got scared and I was like, because it sounded like my grandmother speaking, right? I didn't know anything about tongue, but it sounded like her. And I said, Big Mama, I can't understand you. Talk English. I can't understand you. And it began to just speak. And I said, oh my God, I'm scared. I thought they was practicing voodoo or something. And that it had me captured and I couldn't get up off the floor. And then at that time, he said, "This is my son, in whom I am well pleased." He said, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God." And he ran down John 1 to me. And the Lord ran that down to me. And when he ran that down to me, I said, "Lord, I didn't know." And he began to just minister to me while I was on that floor. And the whole time that I was on that floor, that person that was speaking in tongues was me. It was me speaking. And I didn't know that was me speaking. And I thought it was that lady, but the whole time it was me speaking. And when I got up off that floor, it was 4 o'clock in the evening. And it only seemed like it was a few minutes, but it was 4 o'clock in the evening. And I got up and went outside, and my friends were all still outside waiting for me. And I have not changed since that day. And I said, I don't care what anybody says. I know that Christ is real. And I know that where I'm serving is real. And I've been serving since I've been 19 years old. And I tell people, I says, you can believe what you want to believe, but I know this is the truth. And he is the truth, the way, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but through him. I said, he proved that to me when I was a Muslim. And he converted me that day. And I said, and I didn't know a lot. And when I went back, the lady told me, she said, I want you to, she gave me like a scripture or something, but, I hadn't had she gave me like a Bible and told me that, here's the scripture, where to find one at. So I went and I was trying to read the scriptures, but I was looking at TBN that day. I went and turned on TBN and I started looking at TBN and they said, John 1:1. And when I read that, it was the same exact thing, word from word, what he had spoke to me. And I was like, I started crying. So I called my sister Todd because I was like, how am I going to go home and talk to my parents who were Muslim? And when I did go home for the holiday and I tell my dad this testimony, he called me an infidel. And he told me, how can you turn from Islam to this? And my dad called me an infidel and he was upset. And my dad was my hero. So him saying that to me hurt me. And I was like, I didn't know what to say. But the only thing I had was my testimony. I didn't have enough of the word of God in me to be able to try to help him understand. And my dad, he said that, and it was so hurtful to me. And every time I would go to my dad's house, he would lay into me about Christianity and this and all of that and stuff. He would just lay into me, and I had no words for him. And I had nothing that I can tell my dad, but my testimony. So I started getting more and more in the word of God. I started, trying to read the word, trying to understand the word, try to allow the Holy Spirit. I started trying to get into church. I didn't get into church fully until I was outside of college. So when I graduated from college, I started going to church. I started going to church with my sister, and that's where I ended up getting a foundation and understanding the word of God and understanding how to study, because I didn't know how. I was still doing a lot of stuff. I was still doing a lot of stuff that I didn't know that was wrong, because in Islam, they didn't pretty much tell you, hey, premarital sex, that's wrong. This is wrong. They didn't tell you things like that. They just tell you, hey, basically just don't get caught and be pregnant, kind of thing. You get excommunicated. It was never a teaching like that. And so I started learning all these different things. And then I took a vow of celibacy. I broke up with a guy that I was dating for like 7 years and stuff. I broke up with him and stuff because the Spirit of the Lord basically was like really, the Holy Spirit kept pressing on me. So I ended up breaking up with him,
This is around what, 80?
This was 87 and 1987. Okay. So yeah, this is right after I graduated from college and stuff. And I end up, he decided, he didn't want to marry me, but he wanted us to live together. So I broke up with him because I was determined to understand God's word and his will for me. And so I went ahead and I broke up with him, and I ended up, I took this celibacy, but I did a whole bunch of stuff because I was broken and stuff at the time and stuff, just being in a relationship from the ages of 15 till I was 22 years old with the same person and stuff. I said that was devastating for me, to have to make that choice, but I had to make that choice. And so I made that choice, and I made it for God. I didn't make it for him. I made the choice for God. And so I turned that choice over to God, made the choice for God. But then I was so broken that I didn't, I was hurt. So I was just doing a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, I was dating a whole bunch of guys, doing a whole bunch of stuff. And then one day I told the Lord, I said, I want to live for you. And I took a vow of celibacy. And then the next person that I ended up being with was Stone Tone.
And what year was that?
Stone Tone and I, that was in 87. Stone Tone, Stone Tone was the drummer at the church. I never talked to him before, but I was praying for God a husband, because I told the Lord stuff, hey, that sex thing ain't no joke. That in your flesh and stuff is an enemy for people, especially for believers and for anybody and stuff. Sexual immorality is something that is really, really hard for individuals to understand. And that was a struggle for me, because I had been with somebody from 15 years old and stuff, and I was always intimate with this person. So that was like trying to, taking a vow of celibacy and not trying to be around guys and stuff like that, that's what they wanted, and you feel obligated to give it to them. And I said, I took that vow. So I just basically in October, I started going to church with my sister and stuff when I got out of college, right? And June. So I moved in with her in July, and then I started going to church with her and her family, because I lived with my sister and her husband. And my sister always ministered to me. My sister Tynetta is she is like I said, she was a beast in fighting, and she's a beast in spiritual warfare. And she knew where I was. And so she ministered to me. Tynetta used to minister to me all the time, and she used to talk to me and stuff. And it was great. It was a great thing and stuff that, that happened and stuff. And so she, God moved me into that her midst, because he knew, who she was. And so I'm like, okay, I was dating and going out on dates, and then I just stopped dating because I was like, I kept finding myself in situations and stuff. And I was just quickly tell you the story and stuff, how God is always able and stuff. I had took that vow of celibacy, and I had went out on a date with a guy that I had went out before with. And I went out on him, and this guy, he was like, I had been intimate with him before. So I'm like, I told him, hey, I changed my life. I'm trying to live for God and so forth. And he was like, oh, I see that you're trying to live, for God. And I said, sure. And this guy, I remember him taking me to his house, and thought that it was going to happen like it was before. And I had already told him I was trying to live for God. He didn't believe me. This guy came out of the bathroom naked. I was like, what in the world is going on? And I was like, and I remember reading the scripture where it says that Lord will not place you in temptation that you cannot escape. And I was like, Lord, Father, I need some help right now and this stuff. I need some help. And I said, I need some help. I was asleep. I fell into a deep sleep. I didn't even know when the guy got dressed. That's how deep a sleep that I was in. I fell into a deep sleep. I was praying, and I was asking God to help me. And I went into a deep sleep. And this guy, all of a sudden, this guy wakes me up and says, get up. I'm going to take you home. I don't know what time it was, how long I was asleep. But he dropped me off like 2 blocks from my house. He wouldn't even drop me off by my house. He dropped me off 2 and told me to get out of his car. And I got out of the car, and I was like, hallelujah, God, thank you. I was like, thank you, Father. I said, thank you, Father. I was praising God all the way walking home, and I was like, man, it was so amazing. I said, God, you are true to your word. And so I started praying for a husband.
Okay.
And I started praying for a husband, and I said, Lord, I would like a husband. I don't want to be caught in those situations like that, and I don't want to disappoint God. So I said I wanted to, pray for a husband. So I started praying for a husband, and I was like, Lord, the Lord said, you would know him when you see him. And I said, okay, Lord. I said, yeah, okay, I'll know him when I see him. Now, Stone Tone was the drummer at the church, but I thought Stone Tone was like 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
So he was never going to be somebody in my preview or somebody that I was looking at. One, I thought he was 16. Two, he wasn't my type. And three, he was very, very, very mean. He was the person that was throwing his drumsticks if we played the note wrong. He would get up and just leave, and and I mean, he was doing all of that. I was like, this guy, I thought he was some little kid. I said, whose kid is this? Somebody need to get this little kid and stuff. This is not how you act at church. That's my mind, right? Mind me, I'm only 22 years old. But in my mind, I'm like I'm grown, And so he was doing all of that, throwing sticks, and he would get up and leave and stuff if we wasn't playing or if we stopped and whatever. I mean, we were in choir rehearsal, and we was on the choir. So I was like, so I was just really irritated with him, period, And it was like one of those things that, I didn't even look at him. I never spoke to him. I never said hi to him, any of that, because I was not in, he was a kid. I didn't have to, that's how I feel. And so one day after, I think one day after choir rehearsal, I was like, I have been praying, feverishly praying. Me and Ty has been praying for me a husband, and one day after choir rehearsal, I'm walking, and I was going to get married to that other guy before, right? So I had wedding rings and I had already had the wedding band. I purchased the wedding band back. And so I purchased the wedding band back from him and the wedding rings and stuff. So I had all of that. And so he was like, I was walking out of the church, and then Stone Tone came up behind me and he said, will you marry me? And I said, yeah. And then and the Lord said, that's him. I said, that is not him. I said, that is not him. No, it isn't. And I just kept walking and stuff. And I kind of like got mad, And the Lord said again, that's him.
So this is what, 80?
No, this is 87 still.
So this is 87. Okay.
Yeah, this is 87.
Okay.
And so he gave me a ride home. This is like in September sometime.
Okay.
And so he gave me a ride home. So he like Bible study was like Bible study or whatever. He shows up at my house and stuff. And he said he gave me a ride home, right? So Stone Tone gave me a ride home, and he was just doing the most in the car. He was, we were going to church. I didn't know him outside of that church. But he was just doing the mostest in the car and stuff. He was driving all erratically and stuff. And a girl walked across the street. He was like, B, get out of the street. He was using the cussing her out and stuff. Driving his Easter, like that. He was just doing a lot, And I said, Lord, this cannot be who you talking about here. I said, Lord, this is possibly. I said, nah. And he got out the car at the gas station and stuff. I saw him go back there, and he was smoking cigarettes and, just a whole bunch of stuff. Every red flag that I could imagine popped up in that same instance with us going to take me home. A red flag was popping up. And I said, all these red flags and stuff. And I was like, okay, then I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the guy pay him. He gave a guy to the gas. I see the guy give him a joint, and he took it with pride in his heart, And I was like, Lord, come on now. So I'm like, I looked out the window. I said, that ain't him, Lord. That is not him. So we drove. He drove. We got on the 710 freeway. We on the 710 freeway, and he driving. He's driving. Kind of pretty like fast and stuff. But he's driving regular, and all of a sudden, he hits the gas. Bam! He's speeding. He's doing like 90, 100 and stuff. He's like, man, we passed Willow. He jumps off on Warlow and stuff and go all the way around the thing. And he's driving and stuff. And what had happened, which I didn't see, right, is that on the other side of the freeway going north, a diesel truck had hit a van, tore the whole side of the van off. And the diesel truck went over the embankment. Right off before you get to Willow exit. It went over the embankment, and he saw that. And so we ran over there. We went over there. He pulled him back, and he told me, hey, go and see if anybody, he said, we ran to the car. He says, check on those people right there. So he said, I'm going to go down here where the truck went. So I was asking the lady, I said, it was a lady and a little kid in there. And she was so shaken. She was crying, and the kid was crying, and And I said, is anybody hurt? You know, I'm asking, is anybody hurt? And she said that her husband had went and got some gas. That's why they were on the side with their hazard lights on. It's because he went to go get some gas. But his door was gone and everything. You know, the car was all smashed up and the door was all smashed in and whatever and stuff. The whole door was all bent in, like gone. And so we were talking, you know, I was talking to the lady. I watched Stone Tone run from there, take a flashlight out the back of his car, and jump down into those bushes, which I probably would have never went down in there. He jumped down into those bushes down there off the embankment. He was standing, he went all the way around the truck. He went on top of the truck. So the truck was flipped up like this with the side. And so it was a diesel truck. It was a 18-wheeler and stuff. It was flipped up like this. So he got on the cab, opened the door. He was flashing the light all in there. He opened up the back. He was flashing the light, the flashlight in the back. He jumped down. He was looking all on the ground and stuff. He went all through the bushes and stuff. And he was looking for the person that was in the car. So we saw a person standing up at the on the overpass, right? So he figured he think that's the person, right? So he ran back up the little thing and climbed back up. And he ran down to the call box. Now, I've always seen those call boxes on the side of the freeway, but I didn't know people knew how to use them. So he ran down to the call box and he made the call and stuff and gave them all the information and the direction. And then we came to the back to the car where the people was, and then other cars started pulling up. So we saw the highway patrol coming down the street and stuff. So we got in the car, and then he said, you know, because he was like, he gonna take me home. So he got in the car and took me home. And as we were talking, we went to a restaurant, and he told me about what had happened, how he came to Christ. So I asked him about his testimony and how he came to Christ. And he had told me about, you know, a friend of his was stabbed, you know, trying to save his life. And that's how he ended up coming to Christ. And then the Lord told me, that's why. This is why it's him. And I was like, I went in the house and I told my sister, you know, that the Lord said, and she said, are you sure? He said, that's him. And so Tony and I started dating in October. And I told him, I said, I want to be married. I said, I don't, you know, because he was still kind of secular, of course. And he was asking for some and all this other stuff, you know, and I'm burning. I said, come on, let's pray. You know, I'll get out and pray with him. But he was like, you know, no, you know, this and that. And he would get mad and whatever and stuff, you know. And so, you know, I was like, you know, I told him, I said, I want to get married. So he went down in December. I brought him the keyboard. I brought him that keyboard that he used. That was in 87.
Okay, 87, you brought him a keyboard.
So I brought him a keyboard, some sweaters and stuff like that, you know, because he was my boyfriend at the time. And he went down to Long Beach City Hall, got a marriage license, and he rode around. He had that marriage license under his seat. And I didn't know that. And we drove around. He rode around, and on January the 23rd, which was the death of a friend of mine. I had told him about that, you know, that my friend had passed, and that was her birthday, and that's the name that I gave La Brea, and La Brea is named after her, Annette. And so I told him about that, you know, and on his friend was Pancho's birthday was on the 23rd as well, and so Pancho, he called Pancho and his wife Stephanie, and then Dwight and his wife Renee, and they were at the church, and we had choir rehearsal, and he had called the pastor, and we got married after choir rehearsal, and that was, you know, him being a stand-up man, you know, that was him. I told him, men don't make women wait for years to marry them. You know, and we got married in 4 months, and we stayed married for 23 years after that. And that's, you know, that was important and stuff, because, you know, during that time, it was just, you know, he showed me who he was, and God showed me who he was. And it actually, you know, moved me to be strengthened in Christ.
So after y'all get married and stuff like that, did y'all have any children after that?
We had Joshua in 1989. So I got pregnant in June of 88. So we were married from January, and I got pregnant in June. And people thought that I married him because I was pregnant. I wasn't pregnant. We were married, and he married me because God said so.
How
You know,
was that experience, like, far as having your? Was that your first child?
Joshua was my first child.
How was that experience
Uh,
having the first child?
having the first child and stuff, Joshua it was new, it was new and stuff. And then so, Stone was working at a place called Brown Pest Control.
Mm-hmm.
So he did, that's what his profession. I guess he had been working here since he was 17.
Was he still doing music too during that time?
He was still, well, he wasn't into the music like he is into the music now. Then he was basically, he had a little band that he used to play with and stuff, but he played mostly with the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so during that time, he was actually doing gospel music. So they did like a lot of songs and stuff. I mean, you guys should ask him to play to some of the songs and stuff, but he did a lot of gospel songs and stuff, Living for Christ. And he did Dope Is Not the Answer. They did a lot of gospel songs, right? And they were great gospel songs. And he did a lot of gospel songs, but they really never, put them nowhere. It was just like them, creating songs and stuff and within themselves and stuff. And so he did a lot of songs. He was doing songs, and then he started learning how to play the keyboard and started really diving really, really into the music.
Mm-hmm.
And so after Joshua was born, he was working at Brown's Pest Control. So he would always pest control is kind of like seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
So he would be working at different companies and stuff. So when Joshua was born, I think the last he was working at Talent. It was a pest control company. It was like a big one. They did hydrant and freezing and stuff. And I learned a lot about pest control through him, right? So we were learning about pest control. He was telling me about pest control, and he was working pest control. And when Joshua was born, they told me, oh, he's going to be born on the 14th. So I stopped working, right? Because I was working like at a temporary agency at the time, and I had stopped working. I had stopped working in, I think it was like 3 weeks before that, a week before that, I think February 1st or something like that. That was like my last day at work, and I had stopped working. And Joshua wasn't born until the 26th.
Okay.
So at that, and I think that the second week after I stopped working, he got laid off his job.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had got laid off his job. He didn't get laid off. He got kind of terminated and stuff, because again, he had a real bad attitude at the time. And so he had terminated and stuff. And Stone is a no nonsense kind of person and stuff. And so because of that, you in the workplace, you got to eat a lot of humble pie. And he wasn't eating a lot of humble pie. He wasn't very humble at all. And so it costed him a lot of jobs because he wasn't humble and stuff. And so he had got terminated from the job, and we were financially struggling, so Joshua was 3 weeks when I went back to work. I had to, when Joshua was born on the 26th, I knew that if I didn't go back to work, we were not going to have a place to stay. And we were staying with my brother at the time, and my brother, we were supposed to be sharing rent, and the church helped us pay our rent for that month because neither one of us had any money. And then the next month they helped us pay the rent. And then the month after that, they helped us pay the rent. And I was like, I just went back to work, when Joshua was 3 weeks old and stuff. And so it was like, to him, I guess it was a lot of pressure for him. And it was a lot of pressure for me too, because we were new parents. And then I ended up getting a place. So Jacob and Joshua was like 13 months apart. And so we end up getting I end up working and again, Stone was working with the pest control. So he would get like odd jobs, be working there 2 or 3 months and not, not working. But he was doing it. He wanted to full-fledgedly do his music. We were paying for childcare. We had his sisters, but, sisters and our family members, but they weren't consistent in the childcare, so it would be costing us, time and the jobs and stuff like that because they weren't consistent, and they didn't have no obligation, to do the childcare. And so that was that was an issue. And so, but after that, Jacob when Jacob was born, when I got pregnant with Jacob, I think that really kind of like, we had moved into our own apartment and I got pregnant with Jacob. I think that really took a toll on him. He had got involved in like drugs, he had got involved in drugs and stuff. So it was like 3.5 years that he was on crack cocaine. And we had all of you guys.
So yeah, so during that experience, how was it?
It was.
What years was these?
This was 1990. This 1990 when he got started using crack. It was 1990, and he was. I mean, he was out there. He was really out there. I had left him multiple times. Not because of, that if I didn't have the kids and stuff, I probably would have kind of tried to stay, but I had left. I had to leave and stuff because one time he became, so unhinged. He was taking the money. He was taking the money. He was, crack is a whole different lifestyle, but it kept me on my knees. We were having, we were getting into a lot of physical altercations. He was, basically. It was not a nice scenario, and it was more of, it was hard, and it was hard seeing him, somebody that you loved, just literally waste away, and he was so thin. He was so thin, you can see his ribs. And I just got on my knees, and I used to be praying, and I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, I don't know what to do. So when I was pregnant with you, and this was in 93, when I was pregnant with you, and, he didn't want any more kids at the time. But, I was like, I'm not interested in nothing else, but he didn't want any more children because it was too stressful for him, and he wasn't holding down a job or anything. He didn't have a job, and so we basically were struggling. We were struggling. I was working, I was the only one working, and he was trying to make that music happen, but it was, the music industry is kind of crazy. And then plus with him being on the drugs, it was just not, it was not a good combination for him. But he was still doing his music and everything like that and stuff. But it was the spending of the money, it was taking money and stuff to get, to get high and all this other stuff that it was costing us. I started having to hide the money and different things like that to, make sure our bills were paid and different things, just praying for him and, just praying for him. And I said, and it made me push in even more, to God and stuff. And I was like on my knees constantly, and I was praying for him constantly. And just seeing him in that condition and stuff was heartbreaking, and I was like just pushing in. And one day I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, I need to get him out of here. I said, I don't know what I need to do. And the Lord said, I need you to leave. And I says, to leave? And he said, yes. He says, move. And so when I went to work at my job, there was a transfer opportunity to Dallas, Texas. That's why my youngest son, Joey, is born in Dallas. It's because there was a transfer opportunity in Dallas, Texas. And I applied for it, right, to try to get him out of that. The Lord said he was going to open the door and he was going to make a way. And I know people always say that. Did the Lord really tell you that? The Lord actually told me that and talked to me and said that. It wasn't like I read it in scripture or nothing. No, I have a relationship with him, and he talks to me. I don't know if he talks to other people, but he talks to me, And so I'm like, he told me that. And so I applied for the position, and another person applied for the position. The person that told me about the position applied, right? And she got the position. And I was like, my other friend, she was like, she knew you wanted that position. Why would she apply? A friend of mine's at work and stuff. And I told her, I said, it's okay. I said, that job is mine. She said, Lonnie, she already got the job. I said, that job is mine. God told me it was mine. So she prepared, and I kept, every time my friend just thought I was delusional. She said, this, you are crazy. She said, you just need that. And she was getting mad at me, right? Because I kept every day, every time I went to work, I told her that job is mine. So in November, so this is like in October sometime. And then in November, all of a sudden, she couldn't go because she had a child with someone, and he fought her for custody. Said if she left the state that she would lose custody of her son. So she could not go. So she came, my boss, Dennis DiMaggio. Dennis called me in his office, and Dennis was a Christian. He was an Italian man. And he called me in the office. He knew I was a believer. And so he called me in his office. He asked me to close the blinds. And I said, I'm thinking that he going to tell me somebody passed away or something. I'm like, he closed. So I closed the blinds. I sit down and he just started crying. And I was like, what is happening here? He says, that job that you had told me that you wanted, because I had told him I was applying for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other person got it and you told me that the job was yours. He says, she can't go and they're offering you the position. And he was crying and I was like, look at God. I got up in there. He closed the blinds because we both started shouting. Mm. We was in there shouting and believing and praising God for God's provision. And I was like, okay, I'm negotiating on the phone with our HR. They're telling me, oh, well, you're going to have to take a pay cut. Mm-hmm. So at the time I was making like $17 an hour, $17.56, which was, I didn't realize at the time in 1993, that was a lot of money, and they was telling me I would have to take a pay cut because the wages in Texas was different. And I was like, okay. I said, all right, well, no, God ain't told me to take no pay cut. So I said, well, let me call you back. So I take off and I go into the bathroom. And I said, Lord, you ain't said about nothing about no pay cut. You didn't say this, that, and stuff. And I'm just praising God, right? And so I'm in there and I'm telling them, I say, hey, so I go call them back. I said, I'm going to take a pay cut. I'm not going to be able to take it. And they was like, okay, well, hold on. They called me back. They said, okay, well, we won't give you a pay cut, but we won't give you relocation. I said, that's fine. You don't have to give me any relocation, because my dad my dad people lived in Texas. Mm-hmm. My stepmother and them lived in Texas. So I was like, you don't have to give me that, because I said, I can go to my dad and them house. I said, I can go to my dad and them house, and I can actually, I can stay over there and then they'll help me. So I'm like, so they accepted my offer, and I was like, okay. So I started making provisions, right, to move. Mm-hmm. So when with no relocation tickets, no money, I just said, we're going to move out there. I sent a deposit down, $200 deposit down to an apartment that I had saw that was close to the job. I went ahead and got the bus tickets, right? But I didn't get Tony a bus ticket. I didn't get him one because he had to want to come for the deliverance. And the Lord told me that he has to want to come for the deliverance. And so I didn't get him a ticket. And he was like, I had got me a ticket, Joshua ticket, Jacob ticket, and I was holding breath. I was holding breath because I was pregnant with you. And I didn't get him one. So we packing all up everything and stuff. And we were packing everything up. Uh-huh. And then I told, his parents, uh-huh. My dad gave me $500. Mm-hmm. His grandmother gave me $500. His great grandmother gave me $500. Both his grandmothers gave me $500. His mom gave me $500. So the relocation fee that we needed, it was already provided. God had already provided it through them. Mm-hmm. They had all given us the money and stuff. So I'm like thinking, so I already had my check already still coming in because I'm just transferring to another job. So my check was going to come in. So I took vacation, to be able to go out there. And I already had my check. I paid my rent up to my landlord. I put my notice in. I moved everything out. So I'm have everything all the things packed in a bag at the actual bus station. And he was in the car and he was like, I'm not leaving. And I looked at him and I said, are you going? Because he rode there with us. Mm-hmm. And he was like, because I had packed all his stuff too. Mm-hmm. And I had his bag in the car, but he had to want to do it. Mm-hmm. And so he took his bag out of the car and I bought a ticket and our family moved. Mm-hmm. And we got there and God had opened doors and windows. The place that I had applied for did not work out. It did not work out. I'm thinking that Texas is like, living in California, but we were paying $675 a month for our 2-bedroom that we had out here apartment. I went out there, got a 2-bedroom with a washer and dryer and all this other stuff and dishwasher and everything. Well, no washer and dryer, but dishwasher and all that other stuff for $675. For $450 a month. Oh, wow. And I said, all the money that we had collected and all the money that I had and stuff, we brought some furniture and we lived there, and God delivered him from cocaine, delivered him from crack. And I said he was delivered. And when after he was delivered, we was there for 3.5 years, and then we moved back.
Wow. Wow.
Yep.
So
We
that
moved back here.
experience, so far as that experience, for you, do you believe that the experience was for you as well?
Most definitely.
Far as in what ways was that experience like? Far as what did you learn from that?
I learned from that it's important to trust God.
Mm-hmm.
And to trust God, I trust God wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust him, with everything that I have in him. I don't trust myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust in others. I trust him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it taught me to lean in to God during the hard times, and not to know, even because there's a lot of ambiguity when people, some people can't function in ambiguity. When you believe in God and stuff, you have to really walk out on faith.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to really walk out there on that limb and trust God that when you walk out on the water, you can walk on the water.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you have to end up doing. And so some folks don't understand that because they've never been through that situation, or they've never been in the the instance or the behavior. But you hear a lot of people telling their testimony about believing God in that fashion and stuff. And that's all he wants, is a relationship with us. All he wants is us to have a relationship and to be trusting him and believe him for everything. So I lay in his lap every morning, knowing that I trust him. If I don't wake up, I believe him anyway. I look forward to him every single day because I know that he has already orchestrated my past. Any obstacle that comes my way, he won't put no more on me than I can bear. And he knows what I can bear and what I can't bear. And he always gives me a lining, that rainbow that people talk about, that rainbow is for us. It is for us to understand God has a promise in our life. And so whatever purpose and promise God has for us, that's what it is. And we have to trust him for it. And I say, even if we don't know what he's doing, and I should say that, when my father passed, I said, Lord, I don't know what you're doing in this hour, but I'm going to trust you.
Good.
And I said, and he would come right on in.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, it's good. That's all good. So so you mentioned that y'all went to Texas and came back. So I know we talked off air. It was about like your brothers and stuff. They did the gang they did the gang intervention and stuff with the peace treaty and stuff in 1992. So during this time, when did you start getting involved with that?
So in 1992 and stuff, I note that my brothers, they were like doing a lot of marching and a lot of community activist work and stuff. So I was always going over to the project and stuff on top of working and everything, just kind of like talking to my brothers and stuff. My brothers are the brightest and smartest individuals I know, and so I was always going over there listening. So when we came back from Texas, one of my brothers, Dawu, had a fellowship grant, right? So that fellowship grant he had, and he had created agency a nonprofit called Brothers of Successful Skills. It was called BOSS, right? So he would hire young cats in the neighborhood and stuff to be able to teach them skills. So I helped them do resumes and, different things like that because I worked with him and I helped them with the grant, and at that time they were, orchestrating the peace treaty and stuff. So the peace treaty was something that was still, very new, and they were still having the individuals get together. They was meeting and stuff. So Jim Brown was one of the individuals that they were meeting with. So when I started with the Brothers of Successful Skills with Dawu and stuff, my brother Akila actually brought me in. So I ended up being laid off from that job. And I told you how interesting God is. I got laid off from the job that I was at, right? In 97, and Keela picked me up. Keela called me right when I was getting laid off from that job and asked me if I would come and work for them for the American program, Foundation of Social Change, that was a part of Jim Brown. And they did a life skills training program. And so I went over there as an administrator to work with them. And it was interesting, being with a bunch of individuals and stuff who were, ex-gang members. Some of them probably were still gang members, and they were trying to make a difference in their community and in meeting with individuals in the community and stuff. So my brothers, God had blessed them tremendously to have some insight into that the neighborhood because they were in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would get together with like, you know, the PJs and Nickersons, and they would be able to, you know, hire individuals on our programs. At the end of the program and stuff, we had like, you know, $3.5 million, $4 million of revenue coming in from grants and you know, and funding from all different areas and stuff. But we ran a program. We did a gang violence intervention. We did an expungement program. We did diversion programs. We did, you know, we did everything. Reentry program. We had a 97% a recidivism rate for the reentry program with the sheriff department that they had. Mm-hmm. We had LA County Probation that gave us a grant. So there was a lot of grants that we had that we worked with, and we were successful in the community and stuff because not only that we in the community, you know, because we grew up over there, but we made connections and we were genuine in what we wanted to do. Mm-hmm. You know, we were always in the community helping, and we were always trying to help individuals to move to the next level. Mm-hmm. So a lot of nonprofits that's over there in the community today and stuff, a lot of them are like spinoffs from what we kind of like created and stuff. But, you know, there's always a time that in the community and stuff, you have to, you raise the community up, and you want the community to be at a certain level to be self-sustainable. There's a lot of work still needs to be done because, you know, and unfortunately the kids of the 80s and the 90s, you know, they didn't carry the ball, you know, in the 70s, you know, some of them in the 70s did. It's the 60s and the 70 kids that kind of like carried that ball. And then when they got to the 80s and the 90s and stuff for the drug epidemic, and then the 2000s, now they're not carrying the ball like they used to and stuff. It's more of a, you know, the social media and stuff has made it really difficult for individuals to be able to carry the ball. So we're still in the community trying to, you know, bring the community to that same level and stuff. So I work in the community now and stuff. I work with 2 agencies there and stuff. I work with CDC and I work with Bill Plus. So I actually work with them. I volunteer, you know, to help them set up their back office, and actually we run programs and so forth. And I'm very intricate, you know, an intricate piece of those programs and stuff because I like to see, you know, individuals prosper, you know. And I believe that, you know, God has placed us in a certain position to be able to do that, you know, in my family, just my family, you know, in a certain positions to be able to do that and stuff. But I mean, it was rough, you know, you lose a lot of folks and stuff, you know. I kind of start feeling, you know, like I needed to get out of there when there was a young kid and stuff that was killed, you know, and it's like a kid I was working with, you know, we was working with, he was, you know, unfortunately about gangs and stuff, once you're in a gang, and the only way you get out of the gang, and, you know, they said you don't get out until the casket drop. You know, that's not, you should be able to let people out once they have changed. I said, when you're in a gang and you're younger, and I don't understand, you know, the mentality of that, but people don't forget that you was in a gang, and here you are 35, 40 years old, you somebody's grandfather now, and you're doing a whole different lifestyle. They just still see you as that old gang member. I said, we have to have a level of forgiveness. And I that's what I don't think that they have, is that level of forgiveness. Not only do they not have the level of forgiveness, the legal system doesn't have a level of forgiveness. If you're a convict, they still call you a convict. If you were a felon, they still calling you a felon, even though you went and served the time, did your bid, and now you're doing well. You have a whole job, a family, and everything and stuff. They still calling you a felon. That is ridiculous. You should not be called a felon, and you should not be penalized for past transgressions. If they're going by how God sees things, he said that he will cast our sins as far as the east is from the west. Once you are repentant and repaid, that's like you repaid or asked for forgiveness, or you sought forgiveness, that means that those things are no longer in existence. And I think that that's the mindset because of the legal system. I think that when people are in gangs, what happens is they take on that same mentality, and they don't even understand that they're taking on that mentality. You have individuals who are already, you know, old school and stuff. They get out, I'm going to kill the OG. For what? This person killed a person in my. I'm saying killing someone does not bring another person back. If it did, then we would understand it. The only person that gave up his life willingly was Jesus Christ. And that was to give us life. I said, nobody else is going to do that. And I said, nobody else's life taken and stuff is going to do that. And I think that, in the instance, people have to realize that they have to have more compassion. But again, we're in those times right now where the love of man is wax cold. The love of man is hardened. People's hearts are hardened, and we're in those times. And so to say that, I mean, the programs that we put in place, and we try to put in place to help build up the community of Watts, and just kind of like try to make sure that things are going and stuff. It's not about the funding. It's not about the programs. It's about people. And we do it for the people. Yeah. We're in the community for the people. People think that, oh, you got the program, you got the business because you're getting paid. I like, man, sometimes I said there was years where we didn't have not one grant, and we were still doing the work. And I said, nobody was getting paid. Right. A lot of times you're not getting paid. You're doing the work. And a lot of the money is coming out of your pocket. If you're going to the thing, I said, I know I had given out multiple, the money out of my own pocket to individuals who came and asked. They need their lights paid, light bill paid. That was money out of my pocket. That wasn't any program, any grant that we had. That was money from me, and I said, so it's like, hey, if God gives you abundance, too much is given, much is required. Yeah. And so God has given us much as a family. He has given us much, and he abundantly blessed us, spiritually, mentally, to be able to do certain kind of things. And so it's required of us to be able to do. And that's with anyone, but that's just me.
All right. So I got a few more questions to ask.
Okay.
So my first one is, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
My younger self, one piece of advice. My younger self, how young? Are you saying?
In your 20s.
In my 20s, a piece of advice, I would give myself trust the process. I would say trust the process, trust in God. I would be at the level that I'm at now. That's what I give myself. Trust the process, trust God. Lean in.
One last thing I want to ask. What legacy or impact what legacy and impact do you hope to leave on your family, community, or field?
I hope to leave a legacy of compassion. I hope that I can leave, a legacy of compassion, for individuals. I thought about, thinking about what is my greatest accomplishment. And I would say my children. My children are my greatest accomplishment to me. I can look at jobs and plaques, and I got a whole crate full of plaques. People have given me plaques and certificates and so forth and stuff. I said, but my greatest accomplishment are my children. I says, when I look at my children, and I said, I know some people, they say, oh, I used to hear this all the time. Oh, you think your children are better than us, and you think that your children. It's not that I think my children are better than anybody. I speak into their lives. And I says, when you speak negative things into the lives of your children, you manifest that stuff into their lives. I said, if you speak things into their life to speak life into them, I said, all my children are married. All my children are successful in their own stat. All my children are intelligent. All my children are leaders. And I said, every morning, that's what I got up and spoke as babies. But that is a legacy that I want them to leave for their children. It's to speak into their children's lives, and not to allow someone to speak negatively into their children's lives to cause their children to fumble. Now, we're going to fumble as human beings, and, again, troubles are always with us and stuff, and we're going to fumble as human beings, but to be there and to be compassionate for your child, and to believe your child, and to support their dreams and their visions. And that's what I do. I support their dreams and their visions, no matter how minute, how minor they are. I support their dreams and their visions because I believe in them. And I believe that if I believe in them, no one else can tell them who they are. I am so confident in who I am in Christ Jesus that no one can tell me who I am. I know who I am. And I says, when your child knows who they are, I tell you, and I said, I will tell you this. When your child knows who they are, No one will be able to pull them down. I don't care how many obstacles and roadblocks is thrown up against them. Nobody will be able to pull them down because they know who they are. And you speak into their lives. Don't speak, oh, you so stupid. Oh, you just an idiot. And I hear parents saying that all the time, and it just breaks my heart because you just spoke so much discomfort. You hear kids all the time talking about, well, I wasn't going to amount to nothing anyway. I said, I see it on social media all the time. And I said, that is ridiculous. I said, every time you wait, I said, when my sister talked to my son this morning, she called him. First thing she said, you mighty man of God, you valor. And that's what somebody asked me, hey, what's your son? Where your son's from? What set he's from? And I said, my sons has never been in any gangs. My sons have never been in gangs. They are all married. They've never been in gangs. I said, you know why? Because every morning when I went inside their room and every night when I prayed with them before they went to bed and every morning I went in there, I spoke into their lives. I called them who they are to be. Men of God, mighty men of God, protectors of their households, valors, princes. These are what the words that I spoke into their lives from them when they were little. And I speak that still today. When I'm by myself, I speak into the lives of my sons and my daughter. I speak into them. My daughter's an attorney. I said, I spoke into her life. She had a vision when she was younger. Whatever vision that they have, whatever they want to do, I says, man, I speak into their lives. And I help them to foster that and move them towards where they need to go. If they pivot and change, I pivot and change. But I speak into their lives. And that's what it is. The legacy I would like to leave is that compassion.
All right. Well, thank you, Londy Hill. I appreciate your interview.
Thank you.
I appreciate the raw and uncut. Thank you for coming to Reel Lyfe TV. We hope to have you again soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Reel Lyfe TV.
Thank you.